I just want to say good morning to everyone. My name is Melina Ambrosino, and I'm the Vice President of Operations at the Cherrytree Group. On behalf of our panelists, I'd like to welcome everyone to Section 806, Redeveloping Historic Building. Before we begin, I'd like to give you a little bit of background information on our panelists that we have here this morning. I am lucky enough to work with our speakers over the past few years. I've also been lucky enough to tour some of the sites that you're going to see today. However, I have toured them well before they were finished and in the beginning stages. I have literally jumped over debris, climbed stairs that are unstable, clinging on to dear life to any person near me. I have walked around a hole that was on the 3rd floor of the building, and already as I was terrified with BJ and Barry, I owe my experiences to seeing these buildings with BJ and Barry. However, for some reason, Warren, my boss, is never there and sends me instead, and I truly mean he always sends me instead of himself. However, through it all, I've been honored to work with such a dedicated team to saving historic buildings and redeveloping them into some of the most amazing projects I've ever seen. While I hang on for dear life, these men see a vision, and they have created some of the most beautiful mixed-use residential units, turning what you see here into this. Barry Gannon, our first panelist, president of Gannon Architects, has won numerous awards for historic preservation and has been designing buildings of all types for over 30 years. He offers particular strengths in multi-unit residential, corporate office design, new commercial projects, and of course, historic renovation. Gannon Architects has designed more than 1,500 units of multi-use housing in both new construction and historic mills, as well as over 500,000 square feet in office space. Barry takes tremendous pride in making sure each of his designs are inviting, elegant, and affordable. Our next speaker is Vijay Tachi of Tachi Building Companies. He heads up their business development and historic preservation. Tachi Building started up in 1922, and since then has built up quite an impressive portfolio of projects all over the map. Vijay himself is a specialist in restoration of antique architecture since 1992, and has worked in museum-level buildings such as Mount Vernon, George Washington's home, and prominent institutional buildings such as the Massachusetts State House. He has utilized his combination of experience and education in the outdoor breeze of historic mills such as the one you'll see today. Bring these forward. Unlike myself, both of these men see a vision, and they never see a broken down building. And they show no fear as we walk through them. They immediately see a vision and turning each building into a masterpiece. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, their work is definitely impressive beyond belief. Finally, on our panelists, we have Kirshenbaum, my boss and president of the Cherrytree Group. The Cherrytree Group is a tax credit consulting company founded over 10 years ago. We primarily focus on state and federal tax credits, such as the Brownfields tax credit, renewable energy tax credit, and the historic rehabilitation tax credit, making us a one-stop firm for various commercial benefits. Over the years, we are very proud to say we've been extremely successful in securing and monetizing millions of dollars in credits for our clients. Now, you might be asking, who are these boring tax people up here? Well, we bring in the money. Consider us the money tree that your clients will shake down to finance the project. We may not see the same visions as Barry and BJ as we walk through a building, mainly because I think my eyes are closed as I'm with them, but we turn their vision into a financial plan using tax credits, and then later take those tax credits to bring in equity into a project. During this presentation, we will describe what every real estate professional needs to know about historic renovation. It is very important that while the developer put together the right team, this would be your ideal team. The historic rehabilitation, I'm sure you're aware, is very different from new construction. It is very important that you have an architect, a builder, who are familiar with historic preservation and the Massachusetts Historic Commission. Your architect, builder, and historic consultant plays such an important role in getting your allocated tax credit rounds in the beginning. Your tax credit consultant will work with the team, but it is very important that you have your builder, your architect, and your consultant to really move this project along. Your tax credit consultant will work with them in coming up with financial scenarios for equity to bring into the project. In addition to building the ideal team, we're going to talk about the application process for filing state and federal credits, the important role the architect plays in the entire process, the fundamentals that go into design and the construction of historic building, and of course, how tax credits can be used to finance your clients' projects. Each panelist will speak for about 15 minutes, talking about their roles that they play in redeveloping an historic building, and then we'll open it up for an interactive Q&A so you can discuss different options with them. With that being said, I'd like to introduce Barry Gannett from Gannett Architects.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for getting up early and coming here. We're here to talk about something that I love to talk about, renovating historic buildings, whether they be industrial buildings or institutional schools, former churches, synagogues, etc. And they all have different aspects to them that are unique, and you have to pay special attention to when you're looking to utilize the tax credit programs. I'm just curious, are there developers in the audience? Just when everybody else is a consultant or a builder or things like that? Is that true? Okay, for the most part. So you have a lot to listen for. Are you looking at buildings?
We own a building that we're getting into the historic designation for the area.
Oh, yeah.
So we get tax credit.
And that's a key. And Warren will go into this more. But you know, building has to be designated in its own right on the National Register or part of a district. So you go through all that process. But what I'm going to show you are some before pictures and a lot of after pictures, and we'll talk about the aspects of the criteria you have to be looking at in terms of qualifying for the tax credits. So this is where we start. You know, we drive by these things and we see their pile of crumbling brick and broken windows and leaking roofs, and you wonder what can be done with these things. And you know, a lot of structural engineers will tell you, plow it under. You know, there is inherent value in these buildings. You know, the structure is there. You know the saying, the greenest building is an existing building, regardless of where it is. And where it is important. These buildings often have location that is of great value. They also have size and height that are beyond zoning, that if you're building ground up, you couldn't do this much. You still would have to go for variances, but you know, those are available for the redevelopment process. And inherently are the potential tax credits that there's a 20% national credit, and it varies from state to state. Again, Warren will go into that a little more. Massachusetts, the statute is 20%. Right now, available funds brings it up to a maximum of about 10% for each project. And the issue is that without these potential tax credits, these projects won't happen. They don't pencil out, they'll go away and continue to fall down, and just we'll lose all the heritage. We walk into these buildings, and you know what you do is you look beyond the decay and you know the crumbling materials, and you see where is the light, what are the spans of the building, of the structural bays, what is the access to the buildings, and the buildings will begin to tell you what can go into their shells, you know, be it residential or commercial or even light manufacturing, you know, the height of the space. You know, so like in this particular picture, it's a fairly narrow building. You could have floor-through units, or you could have a center hallway and long, narrow units with a tremendous amount of light. So where do we look? You know, we start with documenting the building. Sometimes we get a nice box of a building that lays out very easily. You design a couple of units and you just march down the building. You build them out really quick, or the builder does, and you're done. You go home, you know, overnight. Other times, it's a mashing of forms that have been built up over a couple hundred years ago. Floor levels don't align. There's no light to the center of the original mass of the building. So you have to look at where is the light, where is the access, how do you circulate, where's parking. It's always about parking. You know, and you surround these buildings. And sometimes it goes inside the building, as it actually does in this particular project. And what do you get in the end? You get these renovated buildings that, when we started on this building, I swore that if we had waited another winter, it would have fallen in on itself, because the roof in the central part, the 5 stories, had begun to cave in and rotted all the way down to the bottom floor. These were boarded up shells, and they are now, vital parts of the community. This particular is the vault, right next to the Samos Arena, if anyone knows that. It was a dark, scary space, and now there are people walking. There's life on the streets. There are new businesses moving in as well. What's great about these buildings is that you can see, they were handmade, and you can see the fingerprints practically in every component of these buildings, things that you can't readily see in contemporary design and architecture. It's part of our heritage, and the tax credits are set up to preserve these buildings. These buildings tell a story, and they were of a certain use originally, industrial, commercial, and now they're putting to a new use, which revitalizes the city. The tax bases, just preserves what we've built over time. You end up with a mix of new and old. The building at the end and on the left are original buildings. The building on the right is a new structure. It's the back side of the canal. This is the front side. These mimic the massing and the construction of the original worker housing that stood right on this site, adjacent to the large mill that is also part of this complex at the back of this image. So how do you begin to know what you can build and have built? So you start with research, and the historic consultant is a very important member of the team. And you come up with photographs, any information that is available on what had been there, because the reviewing authorities, the National Park Service and SHPA, State Historic Preservation Organizations, they would love these buildings to be what they were in the beginning, no difference, but they also understand it can't be that way because you're changing the use, times are different, codes are different. There are issues interior and exterior that they're always looking at. On the exterior, windows and doors obviously are very important. You can see here that the windows, they would love for you to restore old wooden windows. That's nearly impossible for all kinds of reasons. You can replace them generally with an aluminum model that looks exactly as close as possible. They will measure the width of all the mullions and say, no, you got to take that down another 1/8 inch at times. It's all negotiation with the reviewing authorities. And this is for doors and windows. All exterior detailing, any ironwork that's on the buildings, the image I showed earlier, even old fire escapes that aren't really being used, we want that to remain. Roof lines, the eaves, the soffits are hugely important to be maintained. If you're adding insulation on top of the roof, you cannot thicken the edge of the roof. You have to taper down as you get near the roof. And you can't build an extra story on these buildings and qualify for tax credits. It's very important that you send the architect up in a lift to measure all the details on the eaves. That's a rule, so one that I enjoy doing. These buildings weren't built generally with rain gutter systems, so you often want to put that in. And if you do that, you can't just add a gutter. So you have to hide it. So you can see the image on the left is a sheet metal replica of the cornice detail. And this shows recessing the gutter into it so it cannot be seen, so the building doesn't look any different. And if you do that, they do approve downspouts, which didn't exist originally, which you can see. Well, maybe you can't see, but it is on the corner of the building there. How are we doing? Okay. Rooftop mechanical equipment is very important. It didn't exist originally, and it's always an issue on where it's located and what its visual impact is. So you have to put together mock-ups. That's a plywood box of a proposed cooling tower location. You have to go and take photographs from public property, adjacent, could be across the river, next property over, whatever. And again, this is to be reviewed and approved prior to proceeding with construction. Sometimes, very often, you have different period additions that are competing. The entry of the stair tower originally had a Romanesque arch as an entry, which is still visible on the inside of the stair tower. In the 30s, this Deco entry was added, and rather than restore the original arch, it was approved to just clean this up and leave it as is because it's old in its own right. So you can see on the right, new doors and windows and some lights and the signage above the door. On the interior, key architectural elements, stairs are hugely important. They want as many of the interior stairs to remain as is, and if they're part of the egress system in the building, they can be utilized for that. Even though rise and run may not be code, you can just clean them up and they stay for the original purpose. The railings have to be enhanced though and brought up to code. You cannot remove the old existing railings, but you have to add on new systems adjacent to them. Details, again, interior, that fire doors, masonry arches, you can see the ironwork of a spiral stair. All this, they want to see retained, and hopefully retained in its original location. You can often relocate certain pieces. Again, it's all negotiation. That's the key, that you approach the authorities, that you're working with them, and you're maintaining as much of the architectural heritage of the building as possible. Flooring is important. Fire doors. There's an example. Well, this is just more the paneling. On an industrial property, there was always the management office, the president's office, the boardroom. You leave that in place. Again, sometimes you can pick it up and move it. But they want to see as much of the original detail maintained throughout the building as possible. Wall finishes. In original industrial buildings, the main shop floors, brick was often exposed. It was painted, but it was exposed. You can leave the brick exposed in those. If it's a office building or an institutional building that had plaster walls, you will put back a drywall system finish, typically. And again, it's where and how much of all those that you have to do in each building that is negotiated. Elements. These buildings often were driven by a single dynamo on site or off site, and there were belts running across the ceiling. So you often have hardware still sitting up in the ceiling, these gears. If you can leave those in place, those are great elements. It's another star on your side of the tally sheet during our 3 minutes. Okay. Beautiful elements. You can see restored ceiling, the underside of the structural decking, or the floor. You choose which to expose because you have to get fire ratings and sound ratings, either or. And what does this all get you? It gets you finished spaces that are warm, inviting, and really desirable. Our experience is these buildings fill up dramatically quickly, both residential and commercial. Again, these are examples of this project in bold. You can see it's new and old construction side by side. It's a former administration building of the whole mill complex, decrepit building that has been restored and put into use for offices. The interior spaces, the units are incredibly warm with restored floors, floors in space. The bottom right picture is an atrium that was carved out in the middle of the building because it was so deep there was no access. We put skylights up the top to bring the light down. Solar panels on the roofs. The Park Service has come around to saying that's okay as mechanical equipment on the roof over the last couple of years. They're thinking as has changed, and this is new and old side by side. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for getting up this morning and joining us. I'm VJ Tachi, Tachi Building Corporation. I think as Melina pointed out, we often walk a building that looks in this type of condition and end up with, an owner team that either acquired it through inheritance, or they bought it at auction, and now they've got this behemoth on their hands, and they don't even know where to start with the effort to make it, as Barry showed gracefully, with the beautiful elements that it can be. That's where Barry and I step in, because we can see through hulking wreckage where opportunities exist. Sometimes it requires, your sandblasting and your structural stabilization, and then it starts to become routine. As you start opening it up a little bit more, people will start recognizing its possibilities, the advantages of high ceiling spaces, the exposed timbers, the large windows, the restored floors that can shine if they're done right, exposed brick. It's not unusual for us to take on a space like this, and it was all done with manufacturing, so therefore the footprint is so broad that it is too large for your conventional double-loaded corridor where you would have a corridor down the middle and units on either side, as Barry was alluding to. So a good architect and his builder will come up with imaginative ways of how you can utilize some of that interior space, as Barry alluded to with his atrium space. Sometimes some unusual buildings like this building here in Worcester offer opportunities that you wouldn't find in conventional construction anywhere else, and no way someone would fabricate something like this. This is all faux plaster to look like an ancient castle. It used to be the Armory Museum in Worcester, and now they have to repurpose it. However, a good imagination from a builder and an architect can help an owner. We started explaining to him he had awesome space for events, for putting a table for banquets, for having suites for guests, maybe hotel for wedding guests and such on the top section. And he started seeing the vision that we were bringing on board. Sometimes these projects will just linger forever until there's somebody with the imagination to say, this is what you can do with it. And then we take it that next step. Here's a building in Cherrytree, the Uniroyal headquarters. They, once again, didn't have a vision of what they ultimately wanted to do with it. It was an administration building. We showed to them that with the plant behind it, the Uniroyal plant behind it, it had this bridge that connected the two. Well, you could connect that and use it for senior housing, and now that can be a parking garage where people can actually access the plant as parking and live in the administration building and never necessarily have to go out in the blistering cold or in the sleet and the rain. Generally speaking, what we'll do is I will walk the site with Barry. We'll combine our brains on what the possibilities are. Barry will then put together a tentative floor plan that shows various options for what a building can be. This is that Armory Museum in Worcester. And we were showing the owner possibilities that could be viable, 3 different possibilities: of commercial use, the hotel suite, banquet space, as I mentioned, and residential if they wanted, and then walk them through the opportunities and possibilities for this space without really dramatically changing the shell of it, so it would all still qualify as historic property. What we'll do is, this is VJ's mayhem, taking on a project and saying, conceptually, what have we got for buildings? Which ones are viable? Which ones maybe less viable? And what do you end up with space? We'll end up with mill complexes that are massive complexes of buildings that were for manufacturing purposes. So therefore, getting light into each and every building wasn't exactly a priority to those manufacturers. Where we need to do that. So surgically removing certain buildings that aren't maybe as contributing to the history of the complex is an effort that we'll exercise in the front of it with a historic consultant, and we'll then present that to the National Park Service as viable for saving these complexes. Then my team will take Barry's work and we'll create what we call an on-screen takeoff. By what you see in color coding here, gives us a different square foot total for each of the functions and uses of the space, be it storage, be it corridor space, be it actual residential space. And after I've got that, I've got an idea of how I can budget it. Based upon the floor plan and the on-screen takeoff, we can do several different versions of a budget, construction budget for our clients. We can do what we call a level 1, which is more of a global overview of the entire project. If I've got 11 buildings on a site and I need to come up with a construction budget for it, kind of going through division by division is a little bit nauseating and maybe even overwhelming, not only for me but for the client. We'll do a level 1 so they get a more of a helicopter view of what the construction costs are, and it's based upon site, excavation, work like that, separated from the work with the actual building construction itself. Then we'll go on to a level 2 budget, breaks it down by actual division, spec division, so that somebody can say, all right, if I was going to do this level of masonry restoration, and what kind of condition was the steel in there, what kind of repairs are we envisioning for concrete floors, I can break it down on this type of a format for them, giving them a nice, clean version of what their building looks like. And we have been amazingly accurate with level 2 budgets, within 5% plus or minus as a rule with our construction budgets, which is invaluable to the developers because they find that now they can walk into a lender or gather their investors and have something they can actually share with them that a builder's done. A builder that's had decades of experience doing this type of work. So it's not something that they just did in the back of a napkin or they had some market analysis consultant giving to them. They had a builder doing it. We can also do what we call a level 3 budget. Level 3 budgets, I generally have to charge for it with a pre-construction fee. And that effort yields something that's far more comprehensive than a level 1 or a level 2. And it gives you a full analysis of what is possible, and we utilize subcontractor involvement. That's part of the reason why I need to charge a fee for this. First, because the subcontractors need to know that I am viable, that I do have a connection and a relationship with the owner. It's not just a favor I'm doing for the owner that they may not yield anything for. Because there's hundreds of hours that are invested in this between the builder's team and his subcontractors. We'll hand it to specific subcontractors that we trust. And you can see the type of analysis we're talking about now. Rough carpentry is broken down into 3 or 4 subcategories. I mean, Division 10 will have 9 different categories underneath it. This requires a little bit more detail from the architecture team, too. They need to have some kind of level of floor plans that are developed to a point where my subcontractors aren't making wild guesses as to what their costs are. So you can see, this one is 9 pages long. So that's the difference between a level 1, level 2, and level 3. We'll also map out the construction schedules, especially on projects where there's multiple buildings on it. Because one of the things that's intimidating to any owner, if he takes over a complex with 10, 12 buildings on it, is how am I going to develop this? I mean, what is the logical pattern? I've got 450,000 square feet. I've got 650,000 square feet. How can I possibly bring that kind of real estate to market? Well, we'll come up with plans that will help phase the program for them. Once again, slicing the pie so it's edible, one piece at a time. And if you phase it correctly, you can end up with a development that rolls on top of itself and feeds and fuels the next development phase. Barry and I were very successful doing that out in Westford, and they're starting up another phase in that project as we speak. One of the things that we're enormous proponents of is laser scanning. This is, by the way, my offices and Woburn. We chose to use my building as the prototype, role model for our laser scanning effort. What it will do for us is show us the actual exact items of architecture. Every single element is precisely there. This is a rendered photo off of my laser scan. So this is all data points that are blasted by my laser scan and giving me precise location for each element that you're seeing in here, so that there's no guesswork. When I'm going into drawings, I have an opportunity now to see exactly the type of beam deflection I have. I can share this with the engineers team, and they can determine exactly the extent of their concern, where a cisterine might be necessary, where replacement might be necessary. This will show me floor deviations where I will know if I'm 1 inch under or 1 inch up in a floor, so that I know how I'm going to end up either foaming and chip treating, or how I'm going to cover that floor to make it meet a comfortable code and a comfortable environment for people. I like this picture. We had an excellent architect work with us in 1999 when we restored our building. And I'm going to show you what they did on their drawings is shown in red line. What you see is the laser scan is the photo, almost photo, like behind it. And you can see the difference between the roof eave pitch and the arched window and where the doors come into. And this is not a criticism of any architect. They're trying to replicate what I can do off of a laser scan. They're trying to replicate it with a tape measure and a couple guys on ladders. It's not even fair. You see all the differences, all the areas where I'm able to bring more detail than they are able to. This is invaluable for us. It shows us exactly what product we've got out there, so that there's no mistakes when we start doing core drilling for risers and other things that are important contributors to making these buildings viable once again. This is another element that we do hand in hand with our architects. We're experts at Revit. I've got 12 people that are devoted and experienced Revit users, building information modeling. They will do clash detections to determine where mechanical systems can live and how they can interact inside of very finite spaces. Fire protection systems, plumbing risers, electrical layouts, you name it. Every element can be mapped out and then compared to the laser scan so that we understand exactly where the original existing fabric is living and where these new elements need to be introduced and can be introduced. We did a project in Manhattan where we were strictly the building information consultant, model consultant. We took all of their models and coordinated them so that we could utilize the attic space in this building, this historic building that they wanted to transform into a mini Faneuil Hall marketplace on the, right on the southern tip of Manhattan. And you can see the way the attic space has been maximized. We had to size duct specifically in order to make it fit in corners. We had to turn and rotate and pitch pipes in order to make them function but still fit. This is the type of advantages that the building information model can provide. That's the final product. I think Barry alluded to it. One of the elements that we're contributed to, and the key component, key member of this team that's not missing is the historic the historic preservation consultant. And we'll work hand in hand with them in order to get the applications filled out and applied for. There's something that Warren is going to go into far better detail than I will, but I'll allude to it as my role in the filling out of this form, and that is QREs, Qualified Rehabilitation Expenses. We'll take our construction budget and determine exactly what realistic portions of that are viable against the tax credit. They can't take all of your costs. For example, appliances are not a viable qualifying rehabilitation expense, but virtually everything else is. So all the flooring work that I do, all the masonry repair work I do, if the carpet's glued down, that's all qualified QRE. I will do that analysis and share it with the team so that now you know, at the end of the day, approximately 90% of my costs, of my construction costs, end up being qualified rehabilitation expenses. And that is a huge leap onto the next step when you're finding your performer and trying to bring it to the point where you can actually see is this vision financially possible. and financially possible is what Warren does. Thank you.
Once again, good morning, and thank you for coming. We appreciate your attendance, and I hope you've had at least 2 cups of coffee, because now the tax discussion begins. Okay, what is a tax credit? So tax credit is a dollar for dollar offset against taxes. Think of it as a form of payment. So your tax credit would essentially can act as a check in paying your taxes, as opposed to a deduction. The deduction would reduce your adjusted gross income, and it would therefore allow you to have to be able to pay less in taxes. A tax credit actually acts as a form of payment for your taxes. Now, a tax credit can be utilized by the taxpayer that's earning the credit, or it can be monetized, and there is a market for that. So how that occurs is what I'm going to be talking about later, so I can't jump back to this particular point. When Vijay mentioned the qualified remediation expenses, so your entire project budget is not going to qualify for tax credits. The things that are your qualified remediation expenses are generally the costs that are inside the building, and as you can see over here, there shouldn't be too many surprises on this particular page. I would just mention that the components of central air and heating systems, you can so those systems, the cost for them will be included, but there is another tax credit. The historical tax credit is an investment tax credit. There's also an investment tax credit for renewable energy. So you may have efficient heating systems and things that qualify you for a renewable energy tax credit. You wouldn't be able to take that credit if you're including these costs as your QREs, but as I'll go into later, the historic tax credit is a 20% credit, and the renewable energy credit, at least for the HVACs, is only 10%. So here's the expenses that don't qualify: acquisition costs that are outside of the building, landscaping. If you have to build a porch, a patio, a deck, fire, egress, things that are outside the building are not going to be included. One surprising item there is the cabinets, and we had a discussion about that when we were preparing for this, because cabinets are actually affixed to the premises, but they're not included, unfortunately. Okay, so going on to the eligibility requirements and following up on what Vijay said, the one person in this team, or the one party in this team that's not at the table now, but we do have a good friend of ours in the audience here, Doug at Epsilon Associates. So a historical consultant will be an integral part of this team, and you would bring them in to be able to make your applications with the state and the federal government for your tax credit. So just generally, I'm going to move through my slides to meet my 15 minutes, but we will be available for questions. But it needs to be an income-producing property, and that's a key to your tax credits, and it also must meet the substantial rehabilitation test, which is really that your QREs, which we described earlier, are greater than your pre-rehabilitation cost at its most simplest form. And then it needs to be a building that is either listed on the National Register, part of a historic district, or eligible for listing. And these, the four criteria over there just indicate that, that for it to be eligible, it could be culturally significant, architecturally significant, made a contribution to a particular neighborhood, it served a certain purpose, it was affiliated with a famous person, it represented an architectural style or a period, things of that nature. And the application does get made through the state's Historic Commission in Massachusetts. It's the Massachusetts Historic Commission, and then through the state commission it goes to the National Park Service, which is part of the Secretary of the Interior, and they will have very specific standards about how this rehabilitation is needs to be conducted. So your architect and your builder are very important in following those criteria. The next point about that, it needs to be an income-producing property for at least 5 years is important, at least significantly from the tax credit standpoint, because there can be a recapture, which I'm going to go into later on. So I'll skip that now and come back to the 5 years, because that's an important point for us. Specifically to Massachusetts, as was mentioned before, there is a state tax credit and there's a federal tax credit. So first, on the state side, we have an annual cap of $50 million for the state tax credits. And it is that you can get up to 20% of those QREs as your tax credit. But the way it's done is that it's a competitive process, and they allocate it in 3 rounds per year. These rounds are those applications, just to link it up, that Vijay had shown you an application on his slide. That was a Part 1 application. You file a Part 1 and a Part 2 with your state historic commission. And there's these 3 rounds a year, and basically you will be allocated a portion of your tax credits in each of these rounds, if you're lucky enough to be approved. And so therefore, depending on the construction schedule and the time period, and therefore how many rounds you can get into and be approved for, will determine how much you get in tax credits. So the long and the short of it is that although it's up to 20%, when you add up the allocations that you get as a basic, it ends up being more like a 10% to 15% credit. And there's a good chart that's coming up in 2 slides which will explain things a little better. But here's a map which shows the states that have historic credits. The dark blues are states that have a state historic credit, and the lighter blue do not. So it's not in every state, but it is a good significant portion. This chart is interesting because when I mentioned before that it's allocated competitively in the 3 rounds per year, this indicates around 37, so it's an accumulation of these rounds. And this is impossible to read, even printed off here, but it's basically telling you this here is the name of the property, and these are the cumulative rounds. This is indicating what the QREs are, and this is the 20% of the QREs, so that could indicate what your tax credit could be. And then it shows over here the total prior awards, and then going back, it lists the different rounds, where it shows you that you will be allocated a certain portion of your credit. So by way of example, you may have a project that's at its 20% level entitled to $3 million in tax credits. So you may get an allocation of 40, 50,000, maybe 60,000 or 100,000 in a particular round, and then your combination of all those rounds, by the time it gets placed in service, will be able able to tell you how much in tax credits you're going to get. So hopefully that makes things a little clearer. The state tax credit, what you just saw, the different rounds, that's allocations that are made to the project. You don't actually get a tax credit until the project is placed in service. So at the point that it's placed in service, there will be an issued tax credit. And that tax credit on the state side is actually a certificated credit. And it will be issued to the particular partnership that, or the entity that did the rehab. And that credit is able to be utilized by that entity, or it can be monetized and sold to a third party. And that third party can be any Massachusetts taxpayer. You don't have to have been part of the project. It would just really be a transaction of purchase and sale of that tax credit, which is a facilitation that we, part of what we do as a broker is to find these buyers and match them with developers or owners that have tax credits and negotiate and close on these deals. So you will be able to monetize and get these funds in to help you meet your project budget. From a market standpoint, because these tax credits are only issued at the placed in service date, for you to try and get these funds in pre-development, you'd probably have to either get your bank to agree to bridge against those credits, or have someone like us or a third party come in and bridge those credits so that funding can come in pre-development. And then one other point just to make is that the sale of those tax credits is going to represent income to the partnership. It will generally be a capital gain, and the timing on that will be depending on when the tax credit was issued to when it was actually sold. That's a short, the 6-month period will be it'll be a short-term capital gain. And generally, there's one or two ways to try and structure around that, but there are ways to assign your tax credit to a non-profit and put in a structure which helps you with the taxation. But we could deal with that offline if anyone's interested. I don't want to put people to sleep more than I have already. Okay. Now, on the federal side, it's quite more complicated. So the federal, you get a 20% credit for, it's 20% of your QREs, and that's what it's going to be. So as opposed to the state where your credit can be up to 20%, but it's really only going to be somewhere between 10%, 15% if you're lucky. This is going to be a 20% credit. The only other thing I mentioned here is that there is a non-historic tax credit on the federal side, and that's only 10%. The criteria for that is that your building should not be on the historic register and should not be in a historic district. So, and it needs to have been placed in service prior to 1936, and also it needs to have, as its planned use, a non-residential use. So a multi-family apartment building wouldn't work for this, but a hotel would. So if you're not on the register and you can meet these criteria, then possibly the 10% credit is a way to go. And also, the 10% credit can be used for one building in a complex. So if you have a situation where there's one building which otherwise wouldn't have got credit, then maybe it would make sense. Okay, so on the federal side, the tax credit is not transferable. So where there was a actual certificate issued on the state side, that doesn't happen on the federal side. The credit actually accrues to that taxpayer, usually an entity that performs the rehabilitation. And so if you are going to use the tax credit, you need to meet certain criteria, which I'm also going to mention a little later when I identify the buyers. But if you're monetizing it, then really what has to happen is you've got an investor who's your tax credit investor who needs to come into the entity with you and make a capital contribution. And usually that negotiated amount approximates the size of the tax credit. It'll be at a discount to the value because that will represent their return. But they come in as a partner, and so what is important is the words there that say economic substance. So there's an economic substance test from the IRS standpoint that this needs to be a true partnership. So that investor that comes in needs to share in the upside and the downside. And so this chart can explain it. It's a simple chart, but if you have your building is owned by an entity, and you are the owner or developer, the safe harbor from the Internal Revenue, the revenue procedure says that investor entity should have a 99% interest in that entity. Your developer owner goes to the 1%. And why that is that they then will get to extract 99% of the tax credits. The key to that, to this structure and what that economic substance test says is that you cannot split tax credits one way and profits and losses in a different proportion. So you need to, so if you've got an investor taking 99% of the tax credits, then they are entitled to 99% of the income and the profits in the project, as well as being exposed to 99% of the risks. So then the structuring of this takes into account that you want to make those equities fair. So where we say there's a management agreement, generally you have that your owner developer manages the project on an ongoing basis. So rents and things that are coming in, they're all managed by the developer, and that management agreement will really suck out that portion of the profits other than what's negotiated to the investor. And we can also get certain guarantees, but not we cannot put ourselves in a situation where we've taken away all the risks of the project. So just one more thing is, so who's buying the tax credits is generally two different parties. On the larger side, the cutoff comes between whether you're a closely held corporation or a regular C corporation, and that's if you have 5 shareholders or less. So if you have 5 shareholders or less, or you're an individual, then you have to comply with the passive income rules and the at-risk rules. And I can go into that in the question and answer because I'm already at over my time limit. But the recapture here, which goes back to the beginning, that the 5-year period, is that the income-producing property needs to be in service for 5 years. And these are the things that if they happen, would cause a recapture. Recapture is basically the tax credit flows 100% at the time that the building is placed in service. So if a building was completed in 2016 and a tax credit structure was implemented, that investor will be able to take that full amount of the tax credit on their 2016 return, which they'll be filing next April. If, however, something happens within the 5 years, and the most common tends to be, it's got to be maintained as a rental property. So if you, let's say, sold the building in year 3, there's a recapture of 20% per year. So if there was a recapture event in year 3, we will only earn 60% of that tax credit. So you've taken 100% on your tax return in 2016, and now in 2019 you could have a situation where 40% of that is added back to your tax return. So that's a recapture event. And that's it. Thank you very much.
So I want to thank our panelist speakers, and I just want to touch upon some of the things that we had talked about. So one of the things that we had talked about was solar. Barry had mentioned putting solar panels on it. I think BJ and I know Warren has mentioned that. So there's two different types of credits. That's something else that we do. The solar ITC is an investment tax credit. It amounts to 30% of cost. It's structured the same way federal credits are structured for the historic. So just know, working with your consultant, your architect, and your builder, you could put solar panels to give energy to the main lobby parts, I believe, is what they typically do, and there is a tax credit for that, so it's additional funding that would come in. Another credit is the brownfields tax credit, which is a credit that amounts to either 25 or 50% of cleanup remediation. We've walked on many of mill sites. I think, in fact, in my experience, most mill sites are contaminated messes, so there is money to clean those up, and there is an additional tax credit for that. So the beauty of an historic building is that not only can you do an historic tax credit, you could add the brownfields, you could add solar, and all of this would be done with working with your team and building the perfect tax credit project, which essentially means that you had funding that was brought in through tax credits. So I did want to mention that point. And just right here is everyone's contact information if you'd like to reach out. But now let's open up for question and answer. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Just a couple for Barry, actually. On your mill in Bowl, what was the construction cost of that, if you don't mind, and you know the square footage of it?
That was built in 2 phases. The first phase was a little over 200,000 square feet, 183 units. Second phase was an additional 40 units of various types of townhouses as well. And the first phase was about just under 30 million. And the second phase was more expensive per square foot. And I actually don't have a hard number on that, to be honest.
Thank you.
Anyone? Yep.
When you break down the cost detail by division, how do you deal with the QREs in terms of the contractors, overhead and profit, and the contingency?
And as a rule, well, as I'm breaking it down, I generally separate out my profit and overhead at the bottom of it.
But so that you can't kind of put a section of that into each division and have that be QREs?
It's not difficult to do it because it's just a percentage. So that it just multiplies up a percentage against each one of the qualifying division spec.
Okay.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. First question is, the building we have is in a commercial district, 4 stories in a large basement. Park Service, how do they regard renovation of basements? It's beautiful, cut granite, 10-foot high ceilings, but it had never been used in the past, historically, other than storage space. Do they have any issues with reuse or restrictions?
To my experience, no, they would love to see you reuse it.
Even if there's
You can finish
anything on the first floor, I would say?
Doug, could you also maybe weigh in on that question too?
Yeah, I mean, in their review of the application, they're mainly looking to see how the character-defining features of the building are preserved. So as long as, the cut granite foundation or whatever remains a common feature within the space, then it can certainly be built out and included as part of the QRE.
Okay, and my second question is, for providing the cost estimate, what generally is the agreement you have if Touch is providing the cost estimate and, if you get the bid, it's still going to go to bid, but if you get the bid, how does it work out? Do you back that out?
Yeah, we typically, what we do is we'll do a full construction proposal bid, the same thing as all your other competitors. And if we're your selected contractor, then we'll extract out like a credit back to you for what you already paid us for our pre-construction effort.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Kind of municipality work this game is they have to sell the building to a developer to qualify. For example, a town hall historic school and historic district on the National Register.
Yeah, I think you have to put it into an entity, right? We talked about this. If you could partner up with a developer, but I would think you would have a separate entity that would do that.
Yes.
Some of those abandoned factories, are they landmarked, or are they actually historic buildings? Do you have to file for that first? Or they
It's
just
a mix,
Yeah.
generally. Sometimes they're already listed either by themselves or as part of a district, and other times you have to start that process. And a problem you will see at times is that you're looking at a particular building that is owned independently, but originally you're about to purchase, but originally it was part of a larger complex. And you would like to get it listed so you can take advantage of the available credits. The Park Service will look at it as part of this greater collection of buildings, and you may have to go to your neighbors and get them to buy in to be listed as well, and there can be difficulties with that.
you have to go to the Landmark Commission too as well, right? And there's certain criteria for that.
I'm sorry.
The State Landmark Commission you have to go to as well to get a building landmarked?
Well, it's based on the National Register for all the credits.
So there's no state requirements as well?
I don't know. Doug, is there a difference between the state and the federal?
Well, the National Register process goes through the State Historic
Yeah.
Preservation Office, so yeah, you sort of need their buy-in and their support.
Oh, ultimately.
The eligibility of the property.
Does that answer? I mean, you'll end up...
Yeah, I mean, they have to approve it. There has to be something historical about the building, right?
Oh, right.
Right, there has to be some features that, I mean, typically old abandoned factories are not necessarily,
They're usually very good candidates to be
Yeah.
considered historic, because their previous existence is part of American fabric, and the Park Service is very sensitive to the fact that some of these were getting destroyed, demoed, and eliminated from our culture. So they're generally almost a slam dunk for approval. The catch is, and Doug can speak to it far more eloquently than I can, but the catch is that they'll want as much of that factory salvaged as possible, meaning that they don't have a lot of flexibility on, as I showed you, if there's 11 buildings and they're all kind of intermixed like a traffic jam, you're not able to say, oh, this one's really not contributing, can we get rid of him? Can this guy go? They'll give you friction on each one of them. That's where Doug comes in spades to help you kind of coach the right, package through.
Maybe to explain a little bit more what Doug does and just how we all would work together with someone like Doug, who is an historic consultant. So he does the applications, he does the forms, the part 2, he submits, he understands the culture of the Massachusetts Historic Commission, which is very competitive. They're not easy all the time, so Doug deals with that. Barry does the drawings, the architects of plans, and he works with Doug and the developer. And VJ puts this all together and implements it for the developer using Barry's drawings. And both of them already understand from experience what they expect from a consultant in the Historic Commission. And then the Cherrytree Group and someone like our tax credit consultants, we typically don't really syndicate or monetize these credits to the end, but we structure it from the beginning. So it's recommended that we come in the beginning to structure this, to understand what everyone's ideas are, and to turn that into funding, if possible, to help move it along.
Good.
Did I explain it? So I have a question for you. VJ, you know this one's coming for you because I think you literally tortured me when we walked through sites. I'm not the biggest fan of, but when is it that when you see a building, because you know that I walked into a building with you and I just thought it was going to collapse in us, and you see this amazing structure. When is it that you finally say that? What is the idea that you say that, okay, we can't save this building? Or do you ever say that?
Well, the answer to you is I don't ever say it.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to say it. Usually the dollar sign says it.
Yeah.
So we'll look over the project, and you're right, given you some real
Yeah.
terrors in your,
Yeah.
in our coexistence. I apologize. I knew I was going to be victimized.
Yep.
At any rate, as we're walking it, we'll recognize where a masonry portion of the wall is really suspect. Well, I factor that in. I take some photos as I'm walking it, and I factor that into my budget, and I pad it for what I'm going to have to do to stabilize that. I'll pad my steel numbers in order to stabilize, edifices and facades. Sometimes it gets to a point where they keep on going bigger and bigger, and the client says, I can't afford that. So that's when we come up with other alternatives that might require selective demolition of an entire section of a building and a review of it, which is another great example of why I like being on board with the pre-construction phase. Even if I ain't going to credit the money back, I've been able to coach the process along so that value engineering options and other ideas are incorporated into the final design, not after the final design and then we kind of band-aid on these suggestions and solutions. We've incorporated it into the design as it's been progressing.
Barry, I have a question for you, Tim.
Yeah.
Yours won't be as like, why did you do this to me? I know you're innocent to this when you bring me in. You can blame VJ for everything, but so from an architect standpoint, I know it's not as simple as new construction. We've been involved in historic mills where the developer just says, but why can't I just make this into one giant window and like change the outside and change the windows? What is your challenge as an architect to explain that and guide them through? Because it isn't new construction. You have different guidelines that you need to
Adhere to.
Yes.
The Department of the Interior Standards state what they want to see done on a building. And as I was showing on the exterior, they would love these buildings just to be exactly as they looked in those original photos. But we can't get there. The windows, yes, you can make look the same as they did in the old photographs or the deteriorating pieces that are still existing. It's going in and understanding what those requirements are at the outset, and not so that you're not designing things that are going to get slashed immediately. You want to move forward with an understanding of what will be acceptable, and it's not just understanding the way a window or a door needs to look. It's also understanding who can build that, not just the builder but the vendors. There's a short list of companies that can build these windows properly and know the process and do it in a timely manner, including the doors. Sometimes existing doorways are not doors anymore. On the inside, they will be, a living room or an office, and if they were solid doors, panel doors, to let you put glass in the panels to allow light in to act as a window, but from the outside, it still looks like a doorway. We refer to that as door-like openings. You can add some new openings, but you have to be careful about how that is done, and that's all part of the negotiation, and it's a matter of working with the historic consultant and the builder and in our case, Mass Historic Commission here, and say it is negotiation. Please let us do this because we need to do it for these reasons, but look how much we're doing on these other aspects of the project.
Warren, so one of the questions I think we get a lot to us is why bring this in? Because we don't syndicate and monetize the credits until the building's placed in service. So we do realistically come in at the end. But what would you say to developer, architect, or the builder, the team, why we should come into the beginning? What other role do we have other than tax credits into a project?
Thank you. So, like I talked about before, a good example would be if the developer wants to have a structure implemented that saves on taxes, we might have to have a non-profit be part of the structure. Sometimes
we will come in and be issuing, well, we have to come in pre-development. So once these filings have been made with the state and we can verify that a Part 1 and a Part 2 have been filed and certain other due diligence, we're going to issue a term sheet on the state side. That term sheet's indicating that we're going to purchase these tax credits at a certain dollar amount at the time of placed in service, and that would give the developer the ability to take that term sheet to a bank and see if they could get financing against that term sheet, or if they want us to help with that, then the way that it's being structured from a collateral standpoint and things of that nature is important for us to be in. On the federal side, we are actually coming into that ownership structure, and there's two types of structures, whether it's an a direct investment, or it's an indirect investment with a master lease structure, and these get to be quite complicated, and so you also need to have us in at that point pre-construction, because about 20% to a third of our investment is coming in at that time period when that entity is structured, signed off by the lawyers, and we're admitted into that entity. We're making that capital contribution. So we need to be in and working with these guys and checking the QREs and budget and working with the historic consultant from the beginning.
Yes.
I have a question for Barry. At what point along the design process do you involve or contact the Mass Historic Commission?
After you have some design work done and you have some questions on how to proceed on something you want to be doing, the MHC is not a real easy group to deal with. So you have to be very careful how and when you approach them.
Do they give you design feedback of what they will be acceptable and what they think you need to look at more? How does that interaction proceed?
Sometimes. Making contact is the first obstacle, and if you can get response, they will help. I'm sorry to say it's personality driven, and it's depending on the mood, the day, and Doug, if you have anything wrong, do I have it wrong or right?
You're absolutely right. Unfortunately, it's not very user friendly in that regard, and we typically don't provide any feedback until you're at a point where you're ready to submit a formal application.
But ultimately, the goal is they approve that application for consideration for historical designation?
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, we need their approval.
Yeah, you've submitted a Part 1, which is describing the significance of the building and why it does qualify. It's an explanation sheet. The Part 2 is what you're proposing. It's your plans, the drawings, and descriptions on the changes you're making to the building. And then you go do that, and ultimately Part 3 at the end of construction is when they come back, in a sense, to verify what you have done, so that to say, yes, okay, the credits can go through.
Yes.
Do they put preservation restrictions on the property after the 5-year period, or after it's complete?
Can they put it on?
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting funding, there's another funding source for rehabilitation, that once you use it, they automatically put historic preservation on your deed. Does that happen when you use it?
I'm not actually aware of that. You know anything more about that?
Once your 5 years expire,
Yeah.
you're basically free.
For this first,
property.
for those particular credits.
Yeah.
And just to add on that, on the Part 2, the other thing that is put in is that QRE budget.
Yes, that's all part of it.
So essentially, the procedure at that Part 2, the filing is that the tax credits can be sized based on what those QREs are. The risk we're taking is that you go ahead and then you build, and those are actually the costs that you incur. So it could be less, it could be more, and that's what that part 3 actually, at that later stage, will be confirming. But our agreements will all have, I'm blanking on the word, but we could size the credits up and down, but it's based on that budget that comes in at that stage.
We'll do a conservative estimate based on budgeting where we need to.
But one thing, if your costs increase during construction, you can submit for added credits value based on that increase as well. You have to resubmit the budget, the numbers.
VJ, one of the, since I worked with you, is that one of the things that you've done is you recycled material from the building to use it into construction. You talked about wood, demo and using that. Can you talk more about that and how you factor all that into your budgeting?
Well, generally, it doesn't get into the construction budget, the analysis that we do of pre-construction, but while we're engaged on a project, it's not unusual at all for us to harvest materials that are there that either the owners want to reuse. We had one client where we harvest his wood flooring, then put down the gypcrete concrete subfloor. And gypcrete, by the way, is necessary for sound attenuation purposes. It keeps anybody who's been in one of these old mill buildings, in my office is a classic example of it. A high heel resonate on the floor below, it's like thundering in your ears. So we put the gypcrete down. That takes care of the sound, and then he had us relay the harvested wood floor on the top of it again. Barry touched on other elements too. When we have historic elements that are from these old manufacturings, these woolen mills, and have the gears and the mechanisms that operate the machinery, those things are phenomenal. So we like to keep those things intact. Sometimes we'll have to remove them, clean them up, fix them, make them stable, de-lead them, get the paint off of them, clean them up, put them back up again, and they're spectacular contributors. A lot of times we'll even create museums in the space because there's so many artifacts of the manufacturing plant that deserve a home to still live in, and their community still loves this. In fact, a lot of the people that were working in there, in these mills, still reside within easy distance of the mill, and they'll come in and it's just like old home week when they come through.
Or people who have spent decades working in these buildings will rent a unit and live in the same building. There is that much emotion involved with these structures.
Yes.
With regards to the solar ITC, are any of you aware of limitations of installing solar panels, whether it be on the building or on site, with regards to the review by the Massachusetts Historical Commission or the National Park Service, with regards to no adverse condition or no adverse reaction?
They've gotten much better than they had been over the last number of years. There was a time when you couldn't do it.
It's a combination of the solar panels too.
Right. How high, the lower they are, they're much more acceptable.
Back when they first started on the solar panels, they were projecting out 45 degrees and they were visible from everywhere. Now they're low profile.
You should be able to see them, from my understanding, when you're looking at the building. They do need to be hidden, so I think a ground mount would be more appropriate depending on the sizing and how much energy you need.
They like these roofs, these manufactured buildings roofs are ideal for it, especially if they're, as Melina alludes to, like 4 stories or greater, because now your setback is enough so that you can't see from the street. Low profile, keep it back from the roof edge by 5 feet, 10 feet, whatever the requirement ends up being in order to make sure you can't see from the street.
What about a visual connection from an adjacent roadway? For example, I have a project I'm working on in Chicopee where it's an old cotton mill, and the mill actually is directly adjacent to the interstate. And it's a 6-story building. You can see the roof from that interstate. So my concern is if we go ahead and install solar panels on the roof, you won't see it from the ground, but you will see it from the interstate.
I don't think we'll get any problem at all on that, particularly since when that mill building was built, they're being as fastidious as they are trying to be, there was no interstate there. You know, so it's not fair to say like, well, there's a high rise now right next door that can look down on the roof of the building, so you don't have the, you know, flexibility on that roof that you would have if that high rise wasn't there. That's not entirely reasonable. Doesn't mean that you're not going to run into that peculiar entity that's going to give you some pushback. But as a rule of thumb, you should be, so long as you're from the street, you're invisible.
Is it a flat roof that you have?
No, it's probably like a 2-inch ball pitch,
Okay.
so pretty close.
Buildings with sawtooth skylights on them are ideal for these, because very often the sawtooth, the glass faces north, which means the slope is facing south. So you basically run to the panel anyway. And, you know, the angle is just right, and you don't really pick it up on it, so.
We used to have those.
Yeah. Well,
Used to.
then there's an argument to put them back.
Yes.
I had a quick follow-up question. If you can't install the solar panels, what about the electrical with the shut-offs and the inverters at ground level? Do you have to hide those or put some sort of an architectural feature so it falls into the building?
You got to be careful with where you locate that equipment.
Right.
It has to get mounted somewhere, so you have an argument. But again, that's part of the proposal, submission, and negotiation on how that gets done.
I think it's, yes.
Yeah, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but if you're an owner and you have a bill in this landmark, it's on the federal registry, and you neglect it, I mean, there's certain requirements you have to do to keep the building up, and at what point can you just demolish it, or can you?
You can demolish a building that's on the National Register.
You can?
They'll be weeping in gnashing of teeth, but you can do it. It's your property.
So you can do what you want with the building?
Yes, and you can also have it removed from the National Register. For example, my home is on the National Register of Historic Places, and if I decided to start, you know, re-siding the thing, and it's all clapboard sided, and I decided I wanted to have faux brick or something on it, and I did that, they can remove me from the National Register. It can be dequalified as a historic structure.
So there's no preservation?
I'm not collecting any money from it, so they don't have any monetary teeth on me.
So there's no preservation requirements for you to do?
No, just moral.
There may be a demolition delay law where you are. You know, it could be up to a year or more that would hold it up, the process.
The brownfields tax credits, will they typically allow for building components like asbestos to be eligible costs?
The way we work, rule of thumb, there's an RTN, and if you can show the asbestos came from the ground, it can't just be ground, like in the wall contamination in the building.
So
So,
it's not in and of itself eligible. The brownfields credit is for the subsurface costs, the soil and groundwater. But if there's a way that you can piggyback that onto an existing, when Melina mentioned an RTN, if there's a release that needs to be reported to DEP, they'll generate this RTN. If you have that, and then you can demonstrate that the mitigation for the asbestos was necessary. So, for instance, maybe you were cleaning out or demolishing, and there was air quality issues, and you watch out for that. Then we could include it, but we need to have a basis for it.
it's important, we worked with Ed, who just asked a question, and we've worked with, he's an LSP, and we're worked with him to come up with creative ways to tie everything in together to get the brownfields tax credit. So like Warren said, there are ways, but we couldn't just do if it's just in the building. There needs to be some sort of ground contamination.
Do you want to weigh in on that, Ed?
If you are doing abatement of the asbestos, and you test the soil, and there is asbestos in the soil, then that, you can get that notified to the DEP, then you have your RTN, and you can clean it up. You can get your tax credit for that, for the brownfields.
Yes.
Yes, this question is for Barry. Have you encountered a historic building that the building footprint, if it were to be for housing purposes, that you have a double motor corridor and you are to require to have, let's say, 2 bedrooms, that the back bedroom does not have light and ventilation, and that you have to use mechanical,
All the time.
electrical.
All the time.
Is that
But these mill buildings are generally very deep, and so you end up with long, narrow plans. You can have, a buried bedroom. It has to have access to at least borrowed light from an adjacent room, so you can put a transom window up high, and it's a minimum of 25 square feet or percentage of the floor area. You have to have the ability to put air in there as well, but your bedrooms do not have to be up against the exterior wall.
Have you visited those spaces and they feel comfortable?
I'm sorry?
Have you visited a bedroom that is way in the back that doesn't have the natural ventilation that feels adequate, like?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do, the project I was showing you was full of this. Yeah.
A lot of times what we'll do is we'll put those in the loft-style apartments. The room that's close to the exterior wall, against all the natural light, is your common area, your living area, your kitchen area. That's getting the most use, the most sexy space. You're getting all that light. So your bedroom ends up being in the loft, up above that, which, as Barry alludes to, so long as you're leaving the top gap so that it can steal the borrow light from that room, it doesn't even need to have glass. It can be wide open. Yes. We've constructed it that way quite often.
Okay, yeah, because a loft makes sense if it's a 1 bedroom, but if you have 2 bedroom or 3 bedroom, then, there's the issue of privacy and so forth. I was just curious.
Right.
But they do feel...
Right, you can get so if the transom is up high, you have visual privacy, and you can glaze that, though it has to be operable, to get acoustic privacy as well. And glass in the door going into the room also qualifies, any glazing.
Bear in mind, these floor ceiling heights are sometimes 14 feet, 16 feet up. So you can have a partition that's 8 feet up, so you've got your privacy, and you have plenty of space above it in order to get air and light circulation.
I think that's all the time that we have, and I just wanted to mention, I know BJ and Barry are always willing to walk any historic building that you have if you want their input. Well, I need to see pictures first, and I need to know that all the floors and walls and everything's there. But they're definitely willing to do that. And I know the Cherrytree Group, and I would much prefer to review your tax credits than go through some of these sites. But I'll do it if necessary to get some funding. But we work on a peer success fee for your tax credits, so it's an added bonus to help with structuring, and we love working with these guys, and I think we've done a lot of great buildings, as you can see. We look forward to continue relationship, and we definitely look forward to helping any of you in the audience, any person member of this team, to help with any of your historic renovations. You can contact us. All of our contact information is right there. We have business cards and everything up here if anyone else has any questions. So I just want to thank you for coming out, and I want to thank our panelists. And I guess that's it. Thanks.